Rain fell like a confession that night, soft at first, then harder, colder, until the whole city seemed to breathe in sorrow. Emily Dawson stood beneath the flickering streetlight, her thin coat clinging to her like a second skin. The sound of footsteps echoed behind her, too close, too familiar. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. She already knew who it was. For months, she had lived in fear, counting every shadow, every ringtone, every creak of the floorboards. A love once gentle had turned into something cruel. And now, with nowhere left to run, she found herself standing at the edge of a city that didn't care, praying for a door to open, for mercy to find her. In that moment, soaked, trembling, heart racing, Emily believed her story was ending. But sometimes, endings arrive disguised as beginnings. Because just a few blocks away, in a ballroom glowing with crystal light, a stranger would look up and see her. And that one desperate accidental kiss born of fear, not romance, would change both their lives forever. This is the night everything began. The rain had been falling since dusk thick, silver threads slanting through the streetlights, pooling in the cracks of the worn Seattle pavement. Cars hissed by, their headlights slicing through the fog, but none slowed down. Not for her. Emily Dawson pulled the hood of her thin jacket tighter around her face. The fabric was soaked through hours ago, heavy now against her shoulders. Her sneakers squelched with each step. A grocery bag dangled from her hand, the bottom nearly giving way from the water. She didn't even care if it tore. What she carried, an old photo frame, a toothbrush, a half-eaten granola bar, meant nothing anymore. Behind her, thunder rolled like something alive. Somewhere in that deep, wet silence, she could almost hear his voice. Ethan's. She hated that she still recognized it in her mind, the soft apology that always came before the rage. "You made me do this. You always push too far." Her breath came faster. She turned down another street, unfamiliar and dim. Neon signs flickered from a bar nearby. A man laughed too loudly. A dog barked from behind a gate. Life went on around her, careless, unknowing, and she just, 23, soaked, terrified, kept walking like a ghost, trying not to be seen. At the corner, she stopped beneath the awning of a closed bakery. The smell of old sugar still lingered. Emily leaned her forehead against the cold glass door and closed her eyes. Her fingers trembled as she tried to steady her breathing. It wasn't supposed to end this way. She had believed him once, the way he said, "I'll change," the way he cried after each outburst. She had believed love could be repaired if she just loved hard enough. But bruises don't lie. And fear doesn't fade just because someone swears they'll be gentle tomorrow. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She flinched. The screen lit up through the plastic of her purse. Ethan. The name glowed like poison. "Where are you? Don't ignore me. You can't hide forever." She turned the phone off and shoved it deep into her coat. Her heart thudded painfully, like it was trying to find a way out. The rain grew heavier, wind lashing her hair against her cheeks. For a moment she thought of her father, home alone, breathing through that small oxygen machine, waiting for her to return from work. She couldn't bring danger back to him. She had to keep moving. Emily stepped back into the storm. The night swallowed her whole. Seattle after midnight could be cruel, a maze of alleys and forgotten lights. She passed the bus stop, where a man in a soaked trench coat stared at his reflection in the glass. A block later, the glow of downtown rose ahead, golden and distant, like another world. Music drifted faintly from somewhere, a slow piano tune, elegant, soft. Her stomach tightened. She recognized the building ahead, the Paramount Grand Hotel, a place she'd only ever seen in magazines. Its marble steps gleamed even in the rain, lined with black umbrellas and luxury cars. Beyond the revolving doors, light spilled out like warmth itself. Emily hesitated. She didn't belong there. The thought of stepping into that bright, perfect place in her thrift store jeans felt absurd. But behind her, she heard it, the echo of tires, the low growl of an engine, a car slowing down. She didn't turn, She just knew. Her pulse spiked. Without thinking, she ran across the slick sidewalk, up the marble steps, through the glass doors. Warmth and music hit her at once. The sound of laughter, the clink of glasses, the distant murmur of violins. For a second, it felt like entering another planet. A doorman moved to stop her, but she brushed past, murmuring something that sounded polite enough. Inside, people shimmered under chandeliers, silk gowns, black tuxedos, crystal light dancing across sequined shoulders. Emily froze near the wall, clutching her wet jacket close. No one noticed her at first. Then someone did. A woman in a red dress glanced her way, frowned slightly, and whispered to her companion. Emily looked down at her muddy shoes, her damp jeans. She felt the heat rise to her face. Her throat ached with the urge to cry. But she didn't. She couldn't. She forced her breathing steady, like she had learned to do every time Ethan lost control. Quiet, small, invisible. That was how you survived. A waiter passed, offering champagne. She shook her head quickly. Another server stared, uncertain, before moving on. Emily stepped back into a shadowed corner, near a column draped in white orchids. She just needed to wait 5 minutes. Maybe 10. Enough time for Ethan's car to pass. Then she could slip out, disappear again. She pressed her palms together to stop them from shaking. Across the ballroom, an orchestra shifted to a slower melody, a waltz. The air seemed to shimmer with it. Couples drifted to the dance floor, their movements effortless. For a moment, watching them, Emily felt something strange, a memory of who she used to be. The girl who once believed love could be soft. The girl who danced barefoot in the rain because she thought freedom tasted like water and laughter. That girl was gone now, but maybe not forever. She closed her eyes, just for a heartbeat, letting the sound of music wrap around her like a fragile kind of peace. Then the doors behind her opened. A gust of cold air swept in, along with the muffled sound of someone shouting her name. Harsh, male, too familiar. Emily's eyes snapped open. Her body went rigid. Across the room, heads turned toward the commotion near the entrance. A tall man, dripping wet, scanning the crowd with wild eyes. His voice cut through the elegance like a knife. "Emily, I know you're here." Her breath caught in her throat. The glass in her hand trembled. She looked toward the far end of the ballroom, where the chandeliers burned brighter, where the music faltered but didn't stop completely. Somewhere beyond those lights, someone was watching her, not with malice, not with curiosity, just stillness. A pair of eyes met hers across the distance, calm, steady. And for the first time that night, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in months. Safe. She didn't know his name. She didn't know that his life, too, was about to change. But as the rain pounded harder against the tall glass windows of the Paramount Grand, something invisible shifted between them, like fate quietly taking its first breath. And deep down, Emily sensed it whatever storm had brought her here. It wasn't done yet. The morning after the storm was gray and heavy, the kind of morning where light hesitated before touching the city. Seattle still dripped from the long night of rain. On the corner of 3rd and Pine, inside a tiny cafe that smelled of roasted beans and tired dreams, Emily Dawson tied her apron and exhaled a quiet breath before stepping behind the counter. The clock read 5:42 a.m. The first customers wouldn't arrive until 6. But she liked these minutes, the silence before orders, before noise, before pretending she wasn't exhausted. She checked the milk levels, wiped the counter, lined up paper cups like soldiers. Her hands moved automatically, a rhythm learned by heart. Her mind, though, drifted elsewhere to her father's room, to the sound of that oxygen machine humming through the night. Each inhale, each exhale, counted like prayer beads. Morning, her co-worker, Marcy, called from the back. "You look like you didn't sleep." Emily smiled faintly. "Guess I forgot how." Marcy shrugged. "Coffee fixes everything. If only it did." The first customers trickled in: construction workers, delivery drivers, the occasional office clerk already glued to their phones. Emily took their orders, smiled, thanked them, passed out change, a small kindness for each face. She wasn't sure they ever noticed, but she needed to believe they did. It made the long hours feel less invisible. By noon, her shift ended. She peeled off the damp apron, folded it neatly, and tucked it into her bag. The streets outside had begun to clear. The rain left behind puddles that mirrored the sky. She caught her reflection in one, a pale face, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness, hair tied back hastily. She barely recognized herself anymore. Her second job waited a few blocks away at a small cleaning service. The van smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and worn leather seats. Her partner, an older man named Rick, drove in silence, tapping the steering wheel in rhythm to a song only he could hear. Their first stop, a downtown law firm, 32 floors up. The kind of place with glass walls and spotless tables. The kind of place where she never looked anyone in the eye. While Rick vacuumed, Emily polished desks, sprayed glass, wiped fingerprints from chrome handles. Her reflection followed her everywhere, multiplied in every surface. She tried not to think about the irony how she spent her days cleaning up the lives of people who'd never know her name. Around 3, her phone buzzed. Dad, missed call. She dropped the rag, her heart tightening. Stepping into the hallway, she called back. "Hey, sweetheart." His voice was thin but warm. "You on your break?" "Yeah, just a quick one. You okay?" "Fine, fine. Nurse came by this morning, said my heart's steady. Don't worry so much. I always worry." He chuckled softly, the kind of laugh that carried years of quiet resilience. "That's your mother in you." The words hung there. Her mother had been gone 5 years now. A heart attack, sudden, cruel. Emily still carried the image of her father, holding the woman he loved on that kitchen floor, refusing to let go. That memory lived somewhere deep inside her, like a scar that hummed on cold days. When the call ended, Emily stood still for a moment, staring out through the window at the skyline. So many offices, so much glass. Somewhere up there, people made decisions that changed lives. Hers was just about getting through one more day. By the time her third job began, the city lights had already blinked awake. Emily sat at a borrowed desk in her small apartment, the air filled with the soft hum of her father's machine from the next room. On the table stacks of receipts, invoices, a second-hand laptop. She worked as a remote bookkeeper for a local store, typing numbers until her eyes blurred. Outside, the rain had returned, tapping gently against the window. The rhythm was almost comforting. She leaned back in the chair, rubbed her wrists, and let her gaze drift toward the narrow hallway where her father slept. She didn't want him to see how tired she was. She always made sure to smile when he woke, to keep her voice bright when she said goodnight. He needed hope more than she needed rest. Midnight came quietly. Her eyes burned. She closed the laptop and rested her head on folded arms. The lamp's light cast a soft halo over the papers, and for a few seconds, she drifted into a half-sleep, the kind where dreams and exhaustion blur. In that fragile space between waking and rest, she imagined a life different from this one. A small bookstore near the coast, mornings with sunlight, not alarm clocks, her father sitting by the window with a cup of tea, telling her stories about when he was young, a life where safety wasn't a luxury. Then she heard it thunder, distant but growing. It pulled her back. She opened her eyes. Rain streaked down the glass again, and with it came that old ache in her chest. She used to love storms. Now, they only reminded her of fear, of running, of that night. She rose quietly, checking on her father before heading to her own room. He was asleep, his chest rising and falling in gentle rhythm. She brushed a hand over his blanket, whispered, "Sleep well, Dad," and turned off the light. In her room, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone. Her savings app showed $312.48. Rent was due in a week. She exhaled slowly, pressing the phone to her chest. One more month. She just needed to survive one more month. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders and closed her eyes. Sleep came in fragments, broken, light, filled with echoes of Ethan's voice and the memory of eyes across a ballroom that had met hers with unexpected calm. She didn't know his name. She hadn't seen him again, but in her dreams, she saw the way he had looked at her, not with pity, not with confusion, but with recognition, as if, somehow, he had seen the part of her still fighting to stay alive. The night stretched long and heavy. Somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, the world outside softened, the rain eased into mist, and in that half-silent hour before dawn, Emily whispered to herself, as if saying it could make it true, "Someday, it'll get better." She didn't yet know that someday was closer than she thought. The rain had returned fine, silver threads whispering against the window pane. Emily stood by the small kitchen sink, washing the last of the dinner dishes. Her father had already gone to bed, the soft hiss of his oxygen machine drifting faintly down the hall. The apartment was dim, except for the warm light above the counter. Outside, the city murmured its midnight rhythm, cars passing, dogs barking, the occasional distant siren. It was the sound she had learned to live with. She dried her hands on a towel and glanced toward the window. The blinds were half drawn. Through the narrow slats, she could see the glow of the street lamp outside, hazy through the drizzle. For a moment, everything seemed still. Then she froze. A figure stood under the light, motionless, a shape she knew too well. Her breath caught in her throat. The towel slipped from her hands and landed soundlessly on the floor. Ethan, even through the rain, she could see the tilt of his shoulders, the dark coat, the way he held himself confident, patient, as if he had all the time in the world. His face was hidden in shadow, but she didn't need to see it. She could feel it, the weight of his gaze finding her window. Finding her. Her heart began to pound, not in her chest, but in her ears. The same rhythm it always took on when fear came calling. He hadn't texted in a week. She had hoped that meant he had moved on. But he hadn't. He never did. She backed away from the window, slow, careful, as if movement might provoke him somehow. Her phone was on the counter. She grabbed it, hesitated. Calling the police had never worked before. By the time they arrived, he'd be gone. And the officers would give her that look, the one that said you must have done something to make him this obsessed. Emily pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to quiet her breathing. The apartment suddenly felt too small, too exposed. The curtains didn't feel thick enough. The locks didn't feel strong enough. She turned off the light above the sink, plunging the room into darkness. The hum of the oxygen machine filled the silence again. Her father stirred faintly in the next room, and she forced herself to stay still. Not to wake him, he didn't know. She had never told him how bad it had become. She didn't want to give him more to worry about. Outside, Ethan moved closer. She could hear the soft crunch of his shoes on wet gravel. Then, a whisper of a knock. Not on the door, but on the glass. Her knees weakened. "Emily." His voice came low, muffled by the rain, but close enough to cut through her. "Open the door." She didn't move. I just want to talk." The words were almost gentle, almost loving. That's how it always started. Gentle, then pleading, then angry, then dangerous. She reached for her phone again, her thumb trembling. She opened her messages, 911, her finger hovered, but she couldn't press send, not yet. Not while her father slept 10 feet away. If Ethan lost control, no, she couldn't risk that. "Emily," he said again, louder this time, his tone sharp enough to make her flinch. "You can't ignore me forever." She took a slow step backward, then another. Her hand found her bag on the chair. Inside her wallet, her keys. She slipped on her shoes, heart hammering. If she could just get outside, down the back stairs, she could reach the street. There were people there, lights, noise, safety. The knock came again, harder this time. She turned, running quietly through the living room, her breath shallow, her hands shaking as she unlatched the small back door. The rain hit her face the instant she stepped outside, cold, unrelenting. The alley behind her building was dark, slick with puddles. She kept her head down and ran. Her feet splashed through water, her lungs burning. The sound of her steps echoed between the brick walls. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd lost him. Then came the sound she dreaded, the heavy thud of boots following behind. He was faster, always had been. She turned the corner, slipping slightly, catching herself against the wall. Her palms scraped against the rough surface. Somewhere up ahead, a bus passed by, its headlights flaring briefly before vanishing into the mist. She sprinted toward the sound, toward life. Emily. His voice was closer now, angry, desperate. Stop running. She couldn't. Every cell in her body screamed, move. Her breath came in ragged bursts. She darted across a street, almost colliding with a car. Horns blared, tires hissed. Someone shouted something she couldn't make out. She just kept running. Rainwater soaked her clothes until they clung to her skin. The world blurred light smearing into long streaks of gold and white. Her legs ached, but fear gave her strength she didn't know she still had. She reached the main avenue. A row of tall buildings stretched before her offices, restaurants, hotels. She didn't know where to go. She just needed a door. Any door. Behind her, Ethan shouted again, his voice raw now. You can't hide from me. Em. Something inside her broke, not with sound, but with silence. She turned down another street, heart slamming against her ribs. Then, through the curtain of rain, she saw it, a glow of chandeliers through tall glass doors. People in gowns and suits moving gracefully inside. Music, faint but beautiful. The Paramount Grand. Her mind barely registered the name. All she saw was light. All she wanted was to be where he couldn't follow. She stumbled up the marble steps, hair plastered to her face, breath ragged. The doorman moved toward her, confusion crossing his face, but she was already through the doors, into the warmth and music and the scent of roses. Her heart was still running even after her legs had stopped. She pressed herself against the wall, chest heaving, eyes darting toward the glass behind her. Outside, rain cascaded down like a veil, hiding the night. But she knew he was there, somewhere beyond it, watching, waiting. Inside, laughter rippled through the air. A violin swelled. For a moment, she felt dizzy. The contrast almost cruel, the beauty of the world she had entered and the terror that clung to her skin. She took a trembling step forward, and in that instant, she realized if she walked back out, she might never walk away again. Emily swallowed hard, lifted her chin, and whispered to herself, "Just breathe. Just stay inside." A waiter passed, offering a polite nod. She managed a faint smile, though her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The scent of champagne and perfume surrounded her. She felt like a shadow in a room full of light. Somewhere across the ballroom, a man's voice laughed softly, low and familiar. Not Ethan's. This one was calm, assured, safe. She turned slightly, her eyes following the sound without meaning to. And there, across the room, beneath the golden light, stood a stranger who would soon change everything. But for now, she only knew one thing: she wasn't safe yet. Not tonight. And outside, beyond the rain-streaked glass, a dark figure waited, unmoving. The chandelier light hit her eyes like sunlight after a storm too bright, too beautiful, almost cruel. Emily stood just inside the revolving glass doors of the Paramount Grand, dripping rain onto the polished marble floor. Around her, the air shimmered with perfume, laughter, and the soft murmur of violins. For a moment, she couldn't move. Her heart was still running, even though her legs had stopped. The lobby was a dream made of gold and glass. Women glided past in gowns that brushed the floor like liquid silk. Men in tuxedos spoke in low voices, holding glasses of champagne that caught the light. Every corner of the room seemed to sparkle, every sound perfectly measured. It was a world she had only ever seen through the pages of magazines left behind at the coffee shop where she worked. And yet, here she was barefoot almost, shoes soaked, hair clinging to her face, a stranger among stars. She told herself to breathe, just blend in, just disappear. The doorman hesitated, his eyes flicking from her wet jacket to the guests beyond. "Ma'am, I'm meeting someone," she said quickly, voice trembling but firm enough to sound believable. Before he could question her, she slipped deeper inside, merging with the crowd. The ballroom opened wide before her, ceiling painted with constellations, crystal chandeliers reflecting like broken rainbows. On the stage, a string quartet played something soft, something fragile. Waiters floated through the room with silver trays. The scent of roses and champagne filled the air. Emily hugged her jacket close, moving slowly along the edge of the crowd. Her reflection followed her in the glass panels of the walls, thin, tired, out of place. But if she stayed quiet enough, maybe no one would look too closely. Maybe Ethan would pass by, miss her completely, and vanish into the rain again. She reached a small alcove behind a column draped with white lilies. It smelled like money, like power. She pressed her back against the cool marble and tried to steady her breathing. Every few seconds, she glanced toward the entrance. The revolving doors turned once, twice. A couple entered, laughing. Then a man in a black coat. Not him. Not yet. The music swelled, and for a brief second she allowed herself to close her eyes. The melody wrapped around her like a memory of safety, something she hadn't felt in months. She wanted to believe this place could protect her, even just for a while. But safety, she knew, was fragile. When she opened her eyes again, she caught her reflection in the mirror across the hall, pale face, trembling hands, wet clothes clinging to her like a secret she couldn't hide. She almost laughed at the absurdity of it. A girl running from her past, standing among people who'd never run from anything except a stock market crash. Her stomach twisted. She didn't belong here, and yet, leaving meant stepping back into the dark, back where he waited. The decision hung heavy in her chest. Stay and risk being noticed. Leave and risk being found. A waiter approached, offering a flute of champagne. Emily hesitated, then shook her head softly. "No, thank you." Her voice came out faint, barely audible over the music. The waiter smiled politely and drifted away. She watched him go, envying his ease, his belonging. Then, across the ballroom, she noticed a small commotion near the entrance, a door opening, voices rising slightly above the music. Her pulse spiked. She turned her face away, trying not to look. If it was him, if Ethan had followed, he would spot her the second she panicked. The seconds stretched, the violins played on. Laughter rippled through the crowd, but her heartbeat drowned it all out. "Don't look, don't look." She looked. Through the archway, she caught a glimpse of a man shaking off the rain, scanning the room with a sharp, searching gaze. Her stomach dropped. Ethan, her mind splintered into instinct. Run, hide, disappear. But where? Her eyes darted across the room, dozens of faces, none familiar, none safe. And then, at the far end of the ballroom, near the bar, she saw him. A man standing alone, tall, calm, his dark suit perfectly fitted, his expression unreadable. He wasn't watching her, not exactly, but something about his stillness drew her like gravity. If she could just get to that side of the room, maybe she could pretend she belonged, pretend she was someone else. Her legs moved before her mind caught up. She slipped between the guests, careful not to draw attention. Each step felt impossibly loud in her head. The closer she got to the man by the bar, the more her fear turned to something else, a desperate kind of courage born from having no other choice. When Ethan's voice finally cut through the crowd, "Emily, I know you're here." The room fell quiet, like air had been sucked away. Heads turned, conversations froze. The music stuttered to silence. Emily stopped breathing, and then she did the only thing her body knew how to do, move towards safety, even if it wasn't real. She closed the distance between herself and the man at the bar in a few frantic steps. He turned slightly, surprise flickering in his gray-blue eyes. "Please," she whispered, barely audible. "Just play along." Before he could ask what she meant, she reached up, grabbed the front of his jacket, and kissed him. The world vanished, the lights, the music, the whispering crowd. There was only the warmth of his mouth, the sound of her own pulse roaring in her ears, and the faint shock of his breath catching against hers. It wasn't passion, it wasn't romance, it was survival. Outside, the rain hammered against the tall windows like applause from a storm that knew what she'd just done. For a heartbeat, the man didn't move. Then his hands lifted steady, deliberate, and rested on her shoulders, pulling her closer just enough to make the lie believable. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone laughed nervously. Ethan's voice faltered, his steps slowing near the door. Emily didn't dare open her eyes. When she finally did, the man was looking at her, his gaze steady, unshaken. He leaned in just slightly and murmured, "Don't look back." She didn't. Because for the first time that night, she felt a strange calm, an island in the middle of chaos. And as the violins began again, picking up where they had left off, Emily realized she had crossed a line she could never uncross. Some decisions aren't brave or foolish. They're just necessary. And somewhere deep inside, she knew nothing in her life would ever be the same after this one. For a long moment after the kiss, Emily couldn't breathe. The world had gone strangely quiet, as if even the orchestra didn't know what to do next. Her pulse thundered in her ears. When she finally pulled back, the man before her didn't speak. He simply looked at her, steady, composed, a flicker of surprise hidden beneath layers of calm. Behind them, the guests began whispering. Soft laughter rippled like wind through silk. Someone murmured, "How romantic!" And the tension in the air loosened, bending into curiosity instead of alarm. Emily could feel her cheeks burning. Her fingers still trembled from the adrenaline. She wanted to disappear. The man leaned slightly toward her, his voice low and even. "You're safe now. He's gone." Emily dared to glance toward the entrance. The revolving doors stood empty. No sign of Ethan, just a security guard quietly closing the doors and shaking his head. Relief hit her like a wave, sharp and dizzying. She turned back to the stranger, managing a breathless, "Thank you." He studied her for a heartbeat longer, then gave a small nod before stepping back, allowing the space between them to return. "You should sit for a moment," he said. "You look like you might faint." "I'm fine," she lied, though her knees felt weak. Still. She followed his suggestion, retreating to a small table near the corner of the ballroom. From there, she could see everything: the glittering chandeliers, the graceful swirl of gowns and tuxedos, the soft clinking of crystal glasses. The music had resumed, a slow waltz gliding through the air like forgiveness. Emily pulled her jacket tighter, acutely aware of how out of place she looked. Her thrift store dress, faded at the seams, clung damply to her knees. Her shoes, cheap flats that had seen too many shifts behind the cafe counter, squeaked faintly against the marble floor. Around her, diamonds sparkled like captured stars, and every laugh sounded like it belonged to someone who'd never had to count change at a grocery store. She kept her head down, pretending to study the program booklet left on the table. Paramount Grand Annual Charity Gala, benefiting the Seattle Children's Heart Foundation. She ran her thumb across the embossed letters, realizing she had stumbled into a world built from money and mercy, both glittering in equal measure. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it must be like to live inside this light, to never have to run, to never have to choose between fear and survival. A waiter appeared beside her, offering a glass of water. "Here, miss. You look like you could use this." Emily took it gratefully. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice still shook. The waiter smiled, kind but curious, then moved away without asking more. Bless him for that. She sipped slowly, the coolness grounding her. In her mind, she counted time 10 minutes, maybe 15 more. If Ethan had truly left, she could slip out quietly, blend into the rain, go home. Her father would be sleeping. No one would ever know she'd been here. But leaving didn't feel simple anymore. Not after what she'd just done. Not after him. Her eyes drifted toward the bar, to the man who had saved her with nothing but composure and a willingness to believe her fear without question. He stood surrounded by a few guests now, listening politely to a conversation, though his expression barely changed. He carried an air of distance, the kind that came from someone used to power. His posture was effortless, but not careless. Even from across the room, Emily could sense a kind of authority that made others instinctively lower their voices. Who was he? As if feeling her gaze. He turned. Their eyes met for a second time. Not long. Just enough for something inside her chest to tighten. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of reassurance, or maybe farewell. She couldn't tell. A group of women nearby noticed her then. Their laughter softened into whispers. Emily caught fragments. "Who's that?" And she came in drenched. She looked away quickly, pretending to adjust her jacket. She had been stared at before, but somehow, in this place, it stung more. Maybe because everyone here seemed untouched by fear. Maybe because they reminded her of the life she never had the chance to dream about. She stood up. Her chair scraped lightly against the floor, too loud in her ears. She set the water glass down, straightened her posture, and told herself to walk out with whatever dignity she had left. She took a step toward the exit and stopped. Through the mirrored wall, she caught sight of a dark silhouette outside, pacing near the curb. The shape was blurred by rain, but unmistakable. Ethan. Her heart dropped. Not gone, not yet. The doorman at the front seemed unaware, too busy greeting new arrivals. Emily's breath quickened. If she left now, she'd walk straight into him. Her palms went cold. She turned back toward the ballroom, scanning for another exit. The back corridor near the stage. If she could reach it quietly, maybe she could find a service door, a kitchen, anything. But before she could move, the man from the bar appeared beside her again, silent as a shadow. "He's still out there, isn't he?" he asked softly. Emily froze. Her throat tightened. "You saw him. I saw enough." His gaze was steady, unreadable. "Stay inside. I'll handle it. No, please, don't. He'll get angry." The words slipped out before she could stop them. She hated how small they sounded. He didn't respond. Instead, he pulled a phone from his pocket, murmured something to a man near the door security. She realized, and within moments, 2 staff members moved toward the entrance, calm but purposeful. Emily stood motionless, watching through the glass as they stepped outside. A brief exchange, gestures sharp, voices low. Then, Ethan's figure retreated, swallowed by the rain. The man turned back to her. "You're safe now," he said again. His tone carried the quiet certainty of someone who was used to making problems disappear. For a second, she didn't know what to do. Say thank you, apologize, vanish. Words failed her. All she managed was a shaky whisper. "You didn't have to do that." He looked at her, and something flickered in his eyes, a faint softness breaking through the control. "Maybe I did." The music swelled again behind them, strings and piano blending into something almost tender. Around them, the world continued as if nothing had happened, but for Emily, everything had shifted. She lowered her gaze, unsure what to do with the strange warmth blooming in her chest, half gratitude, half disbelief. He extended a hand slightly, not to touch, just to steady her if she needed it. "Sit down," he said quietly. "You shouldn't leave yet." Emily hesitated, then nodded. She followed him back toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from the curious eyes. As they walked, she caught her reflection once more in the mirror, this time beside his. A soaked girl in a thrift store dress beside a man who looked like he'd been born under chandeliers. A world apart. And yet, somehow, at that moment, they were standing on the same side of the glass. She didn't know his name, not yet. But deep down, something told her she would soon. And when she did, her life would never look the same again. From across the ballroom, under the soft gleam of chandeliers, Liam Carter stood near the bar, one hand wrapped loosely around a glass of scotch. The ice clinked quietly as he tilted the glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. The music swelled and dipped, couples spun in smooth circles, and polite laughter rose like perfume from the crowd. It was an evening he'd attended 100 times before, every detail predictable, every conversation rehearsed. Yet tonight, something felt different. There was a disturbance in the calm order of the room, a ripple in a pool that had been still for too long. He saw her the moment she stepped into the light. She didn't belong there, and not because she lacked the right dress or jewelry. It was because she didn't wear the same mask everyone else did. While others floated through the evening in glitter and grace, she stood near the edge of the room, still as a held breath. Her hair clung damply to her temples. Her hands were folded tightly in front of her, as if she was trying to keep herself from falling apart. And yet, there was something unbreakable in the way she stood. Liam couldn't look away. He didn't know who she was or how she'd come in, but he could tell she was scared, not the kind of fear that came from shyness or awe, but a deeper kind, like someone who'd been running for too long and finally ran out of places to hide. Her eyes moved across the room, scanning every face, every door, like she was searching for safety but didn't trust that it existed. He'd seen that look before, years ago, in another life, before the weight of inheritance and expectations turned him into a man of measured control. It was the look his mother had worn the night she decided to leave his father, a quiet, desperate strength wrapped inside terror. Liam turned slightly, leaning his elbow on the bar. He didn't want to stare, didn't want to make her feel watched, but his gaze kept finding her anyway, like a compass drawn to something it couldn't ignore. At his side, a woman in a silver gown spoke, her laughter chiming faintly. "Liam, you're not even listening." He offered her a polite smile, the kind that required no sincerity. "I'm sorry. What were you saying?" She followed his eyes, caught sight of Emily, and frowned slightly. "Who is she?" He shook his head. "I don't know." The woman said, adjusting her diamond necklace. "She's drenched. Poor thing must have wandered in by mistake." Her tone was light, dismissive, but Liam didn't answer. His eyes were still on the girl in the corner, watching as she brushed a strand of hair from her face, her fingers trembling slightly. Something about her made him forget where he was, forget what was expected of him. The sound of the orchestra shifted then, a slower melody, deeper, the kind that filled the space between words. Emily moved slightly, just enough for him to see her face fully. There it was again, strength and hurt, tangled together. She looked fragile, but not broken. She looked like someone holding her breath through a storm. Liam set his glass down. He didn't plan to cross the room, not yet. There was a decorum to maintain, an image he had worn since he was old enough to understand what the Carter name demanded. But even from here, he felt a pull he couldn't explain, a need to know why this stranger's presence had silenced the noise of his world. A few minutes passed before he noticed something else. The doorman at the far end of the ballroom seemed tense. 2 security staff had moved discreetly toward the entrance. Then he saw the dark figure outside the window, a man pacing just beyond the rain. Liam's jaw tightened. Instinct. He watched as Emily's body went still, her gaze locking on that same spot beyond the glass. The air around her shifted subtle, but he saw it. Fear, recognition, and just like that, he understood. Whoever that man was, he wasn't just anyone. He was the reason she was here, the reason her hands shook. Liam straightened, his eyes following the quiet communication between staff at the door. He didn't intervene, not yet. He wanted to see how she would move. And when the guard stepped outside, when the figure finally retreated into the night, he saw the moment her body exhaled. Relief washed through her like a slow tide. For a brief second, her eyes lifted, and they met his. It wasn't long, just the length of a breath, but it was enough. Enough for him to see the gratitude she didn't have the words to speak. Enough for her to see something in him that made her stop shrinking. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. A silent promise. "You're safe." She looked away quickly, her shoulders lowering slightly as if she had finally allowed herself to rest. Liam turned back to the bar, his pulse steady, but his mind restless. The sound of the room returned slowly, music, laughter, conversation, but none of it landed the same. He thought about the girl's face, her wide, unguarded eyes. People didn't look at him like that anymore. People looked at him with expectation, calculation, sometimes admiration, but never that raw honesty. It unsettled him. It intrigued him. He took another slow sip of scotch, the ice now half melted, and stared into the amber swirl. He wondered what kind of life could shape a woman like that, terrified and brave in the same breath. He wondered what she was running from, and why he suddenly cared, nearby. One of his company's board members clapped him on the shoulder, laughing about a new contract signed earlier that week. Liam smiled where he was supposed to, responded when he needed to, but his mind stayed elsewhere. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Emily again, this time seated, her hands wrapped around a glass of water. She looked small but composed, as if she were rebuilding herself piece by piece in that chair. And for a fleeting moment, Liam Carter, the man who was always in control, felt something unfamiliar flicker through him. Not pity, not curiosity, something softer, quieter, something he couldn't name. The orchestra began a new song, brighter now, but Liam wasn't listening. His gaze drifted once more to where she sat, the girl who didn't belong in this room, yet somehow commanded its attention without trying. And though he didn't know it yet, that single, wordless connection across the room had already altered the course of both their lives. He turned back to his drink, but his reflection in the glass wasn't the same. The night had shifted. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper, and somewhere deep within the noise of the ballroom, destiny took its quiet, deliberate step forward. The sound came first. A crack, sharp and wrong, echoing across marble and glass. For a moment, no one in the ballroom moved. The string quartet faltered mid-note. Then the heavy doors swung open, slamming against the walls, and the noise of the party collapsed into silence. Ethan Brooks stood in the doorway. His clothes were drenched, rainwater dripping from his coat onto the floor. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, unfocused, furious. "Emily." His voice boomed through the hall, shattering the calm like thunder. "Where are you?" The crowd gasped. A few people stepped back instinctively, clutching their glasses or whispering behind hands. Someone muttered about security, but no one moved to stop him, not yet. They were too stunned, too caught between disbelief and curiosity. Emily froze. She'd been standing near the far wall, half hidden behind a marble column. When she saw him, saw the familiar shape of his rage filling the doorway, her heart stopped. For a second, she thought she might faint. The air left her lungs all at once. No, not here, not again. Her eyes darted toward the exit on the other side of the ballroom, but it was too far. He'd see her if she moved. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her body wouldn't obey. Fear pinned her in place, like a hand on her throat. Ethan's voice grew harsher. "Emily, don't make me look for you." A murmur ran through the room. People began whispering questions, speculations, fragments of stories they were already inventing about the soaked, furious man and the invisible woman he was calling for. The world of the wealthy loved drama, especially when it didn't belong to them. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. Then she saw him, Liam, standing by the bar, eyes locked on her across the distance. He didn't look confused or alarmed, just alert, steady. He had already understood what was happening before anyone else did, and that was the moment she moved. She stepped out from behind the column, her feet barely feeling the ground. She didn't think, didn't plan. She just ran through the glittering crowd, past the stunned faces, toward the one person whose calm felt like shelter. Liam's glass clinked softly as he set it down. His gaze never left her. Emily Ethan's shout tore through the room again. She heard footsteps fast, pounding against marble. He was coming closer. The orchestra had stopped entirely now. All that remained was the sound of her breath, ragged and uneven, and the faint hum of the chandeliers above. When she reached Liam, she didn't speak. Her hands trembled as she grabbed the lapel of his jacket, eyes wide and desperate. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Just trust me." Before he could ask why, before she could lose the nerve, she rose on her toes and kissed him. The room gasped. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was the kind of kiss that came from fear, the kind that burned through reason and left only survival behind. Her heart felt like it might burst. She could taste salt tears, rain, panic. Liam didn't move at first. Then, as if realizing what she was doing, he responded not with confusion, not with rejection, but with instinct. His hand came up, firm against her back, drawing her closer. The warmth of him contrasted so violently with the cold around her that she almost sobbed from relief. To everyone else in that glittering room, it looked like a reunion, a lover's embrace after too long apart. To her, it was a lifeline. She felt his breath against her cheek when he murmured, so low only she could hear, "He's watching, isn't he?" Her eyes barely flicked toward the entrance. Ethan stood frozen, disbelief twisting his features, his fists clenched, his jaw tight, but he didn't move closer. "Yes," she breathed, then let him see. Liam tightened his arm around her waist, turning slightly so that the crowd and Ethan could see his face clearly. The murmur of voices spread again, this time mixed with admiration, curiosity, even envy. Whatever story the guests would tell later, it would no longer be about a crazed man storming a party. It would be about a woman who'd rushed into the arms of someone powerful, someone who belonged here. Liam leaned closer, his tone calm and controlled. "Don't look back." She didn't. She couldn't. Instead, she let her forehead rest against his shoulder for a moment, breathing in the faint scent of cedar and whiskey. Her heart began to slow. Around them, the atmosphere shifted, guests returning to their conversations, laughter rising again in cautious ripples. The chaos smoothed itself over, as it always did in places like this. Appearances mattered more than truth. A few seconds later, security appeared beside Ethan. Liam didn't need to say a word. One glance from him was enough. His quiet authority spoke louder than orders. "Sir," one of the guards said, stepping forward, "I'll have to ask you to leave." Ethan's eyes darted from Liam to Emily and back again. "You don't know her?" he hissed. "She's lying to you." Liam's expression didn't change. "I know enough." It was the calmness in his voice that undid Ethan. He swore under his breath, turned sharply, and stormed back out through the doors. The rain swallowed him whole. Only then did Emily let go. Her hand slipped from his jacket. The moment she stepped back, reality came rushing in like cold air through an open window. She could still feel his warmth on her skin. She began, but her voice failed. Liam shook his head. "You don't need to explain. Not here." She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Around them, the party carried on as if nothing had happened. The music returned, soft and polite, like the night itself was trying to erase what it had seen. But Liam didn't look away from her. He noticed the tear in her sleeve, the small cut on her wrist where her bracelet had snapped, the exhaustion behind her trembling smile. Whoever she wasn't just a lost guest. And Emily, standing there beneath the golden light, realized she couldn't hide anymore. Not from the truth, not from him. "Thank you," she whispered finally. He nodded once. "You should sit. Catch your breath." She obeyed, finding a quiet corner as he spoke quietly to the staff. Within moments, 2 guards were stationed discreetly near the door. Emily sat there, hands clasped in her lap, still feeling the echo of that impossible moment, the kiss, the warmth, the safety. For the first time in months, She wasn't running, but she also knew something else. What she'd done could never be undone. That kiss born from fear had changed everything. And as Liam turned back toward her, the faintest trace of a question in his eyes, Emily felt the truth settle deep inside her. Fate didn't always arrive with gentleness. Sometimes it broke the door down. Sometimes it came wearing the face of a stranger. For a heartbeat, the ballroom froze. The lights, the music, the murmuring crowd all suspended in a single stunned breath. Then Liam Carter moved, smooth, deliberate, like someone who had been here before inside chaos, holding the calm. His hand came up to the small of Emily's back, firm but gentle, anchoring her trembling frame. He understood immediately. The fear in her eyes wasn't confusion. It was survival. And the man at the door, the one shouting her name, shaking off the guards, wasn't a stranger to her. He was the reason she ran. So Liam did what instinct told him. He turned the impossible moment into something believable. His other hand slid to the side of her face, his thumb brushing the cold rain still clinging to her skin. Then, with a quiet exhale, he deepened the kiss, not out of passion, but protection. The crowd's unease shifted. The tension melted into something else entirely, a murmur of curiosity, admiration, even envy. What had been chaos now looked like romance. A woman nearby gasped softly. "Oh, it's them, of course." Someone else laughed under their breath, relief creeping into their tone. Didn't realize Carter was seeing someone. The lie took root on its own. Liam's body shielded Emily from every gaze, his tall frame blocking her from view. She could smell his cologne cedar, smoke, something faintly sweet beneath the sharpness. Her hands clutched his jacket like a lifeline. Her pulse, wild and uneven, began to find his rhythm. "It's okay," he murmured against her temple, voice so low it almost disappeared beneath the music that was slowly beginning again. "I've got you." And for the first time in what felt like forever, she believed someone behind them. Ethan's anger crackled like static. "You think this changes anything?" He spat, his voice sharp and raw. "You don't know her. She's lying to you." Liam lifted his head then, his arm still around Emily. His eyes met Ethan's with quiet precision. There was no anger there, only authority, a steady, unflinching kind of control. "She's with me," Liam said simply. The words carried through the hall, soft but final. It wasn't just a statement, it was a dismissal. And the people around them understood. So did security. Within seconds, 2 men in black suits approached Ethan. "Sir, I'll have to ask you to leave," one said, voice firm. Ethan's face twisted, fury and disbelief colliding. "You don't—" Liam didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Now, the room held its breath. For a moment, Emily thought Ethan might lunge, might do what he'd done before, grab, shout, demand control the only way he knew how. But something about Liam stopped him, the steadiness, the certainty. It was the kind of quiet power that made even chaos hesitate. Ethan glared, muttered a curse, and turned sharply. The guards escorted him out, his footsteps echoing across marble until the doors shut behind him with a solid, satisfying thud. The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. Then, as if on cue, the orchestra picked up the melody again, soft, sweeping, pretending none of it had ever happened. Liam looked down at Emily. Her chest still rose and fell too quickly. Her lips trembled, but her eyes, those wide, storm-touched eyes, held steady on his. "You can breathe now," he said quietly. She tried. It came out shaky, uneven, but real. I'm sorry," she managed, the words catching on her throat. "Don't be," he replied. "You did what you had to." He guided her toward the edge of the ballroom, away from the curious stares. She followed without question, her hand still clutching his sleeve. They reached a small alcove near the grand staircase, a place where the light dimmed and the hum of voices softened into a distant echo. "Sit," he said gently, motioning to a velvet bench. Emily obeyed. She wiped her palms on her damp dress, her fingers still trembling. You didn't have to help me. Liam leaned against the marble pillar beside her, arms crossed loosely. His tone stayed calm. Maybe not. But I couldn't just watch. The answer was simple, but something in the way he said it made her throat tighten. People didn't usually say things like that to her. People didn't usually see her. She looked down, twisting the hem of her sleeve. He won't stop, she whispered. He never does. Liam studied her quietly, noting the small bruise on her wrist, the way her shoulders curled in, as if bracing for impact. He won't get another chance, he said finally. Not while you're here. The certainty in his voice was a strange comfort. It didn't sound like an offer. It sounded like a fact. Emily nodded, though her chest still felt tight. Thank you, she said again, barely louder than a breath. He inclined his head slightly, almost like a promise. Stay as long as you need. Security will keep an eye out. You're safe. The word safe felt foreign on her tongue, almost too fragile to touch. She wanted to believe it, but belief came slowly after fear. She glanced back toward the ballroom. The guests had resumed their laughter, their polite conversations. A few still glanced her way, curiosity lingering, but no one approached. The story had already shifted. Rumor now painted her as someone important, someone belonging to him. The irony made her almost laugh. For once, gossip was her shield. Liam watched her for a moment longer, then said softly, I'm Liam. By the way, she blinked. Emily. He nodded. Emily. As if testing the sound of her name, it came out steady, deliberate, as though he was anchoring it in his mind. For a while, neither spoke. The music drifted through the air again, low and graceful. Outside, the rain softened to a steady whisper against the tall windows. Emily's body began to relax, the tremor in her hands fading slowly. But her mind replayed the moment again and again, the heat of his hand on her back, the steadiness of his voice, the way the world had seemed to pause between them. She had kissed him out of desperation, but now, sitting there beside him, she couldn't shake the thought that something had shifted in that moment, something she couldn't name yet. Liam glanced at her again, his voice breaking the quiet. You should probably get home soon. Someone can escort you. She shook her head. Not yet. He might still be out there. He considered that, then nodded, then stay. It wasn't an order, just an invitation, but it carried a warmth that made her chest ache. The orchestra played on, the chandeliers shimmered, and in the soft corner light, Emily Dawson, the girl who had spent months running, sat beside a man she had met less than an hour ago, and felt, for the first time, that maybe the night wouldn't end in fear. Outside, thunder rolled once more, distant but fading. Inside, the air held still a fragile peace suspended between them, and neither of them knew it yet, but that one quiet moment would echo far beyond this night. The music played softly again, smoothing the jagged silence that had split the night. A low murmur filled the ballroom, people returning to laughter, pretending nothing unusual had happened. But in the shadowed corner of the grand hall, far from the chandelier light, Emily Dawson sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the echo of her own heartbeat louder than the orchestra. Liam stood beside her for a moment, silent. The calm he carried seemed to settle over her like a blanket, measured, protective, unhurried. He had already spoken to security, already ensured no one could get in without his approval. It was done, but he stayed there anyway, leaning slightly against the marble pillar, watching her without intruding. Finally, he said quietly, he won't be coming back tonight. Emily nodded, though her throat still ached from fear. He's like that. When he's angry, it's hard to reason with him. Was he your boyfriend? The question was gentle, not probing, just a man trying to understand. She hesitated, staring at the rim of her glass. He was, she said finally, for 3 years. It started, normal. He was kind, charming. the kind of man who made everyone else believe he was perfect. She gave a faint, brittle smile, and I believed it too. Her voice faltered, the weight of memory pressing behind her ribs. But he changed, little by little. He'd get jealous, then sorry, angry, then gentle. I thought if I just loved him harder, it would fix things. But love doesn't fix fear, it only hides it for a while. Liam listened without interrupting. His expression didn't shift, but something in his eyes darkened a quiet fury he didn't let show. And when I finally left, she continued, her hands tightening around each other. He followed, calls, messages. Sometimes he'd just stand outside my building for hours. I tried ignoring him. I even thought about moving. But I don't have enough money. My father's sick. I didn't know what else to do. Her voice cracked on that last word, soft as a thread snapping. Liam let the silence linger for a few beats before he spoke. You shouldn't have to handle that alone. Emily looked up, startled by the certainty in his tone. What do you mean, I mean? He said, his voice calm. I can help you. She shook her head immediately. You don't even know me. You've already done too much. He smiled faintly. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't require knowing everything. Something in the way he said it made her chest tighten. Not pity, but understanding. As if he recognized the kind of exhaustion that came from always having to survive. She tried to steady her breathing. I can't ask you for help. I don't want to be someone's problem. Liam's gaze softened. You're not a problem, Emily. You're someone who deserves to feel safe again. Her name on his lips sounded different, warmer somehow, like he meant to take care of it. She looked down again, afraid her face might betray the sudden rush of emotion. Gratitude, relief, something dangerously close to trust. A long pause stretched between them, filled only by the quiet rhythm of the string quartet and the faint clinking of crystal glasses somewhere in the distance. Then Liam spoke again. I should probably introduce myself properly. She glanced up, meeting his eyes for the first time without fear. They were gray, flecked with a kind of quiet steadiness she couldn't look away from. My name is Liam, he said. Liam Carter. She blinked, trying to place it. The name sounded familiar, something she'd heard in passing, maybe on the news or in the background of a conversation she wasn't part of. But the thought slipped away before it formed. Thank you, Mr. Carter, she said softly, for everything. Just Liam, he corrected gently. She smiled for the first time that night, a small, shy curve of her lips. Okay, just Liam. He smiled back, a brief flicker that softened his usually composed features. You'll be all right. I'll make sure of it. The words shouldn't have meant as much as they did, but they wrapped around her like a promise she didn't realize she'd been waiting for. She took a slow breath, letting the air fill her chest. The terror of the last hour began to fade, replaced by something quieter, steadier. A fragile sense of safety she hadn't felt in months. Outside, the rain had stopped. Drops clung to the windows, glinting under the city lights like tiny fragments of glass. Inside, the night moved on, unaware that somewhere in its corner, a girl who had nearly lost everything was beginning to find herself again. Liam watched her as she sat in that stillness, the tension slowly leaving her shoulders. He didn't know why it mattered to him so much. He'd met hundreds of people powerful, desperate, charming, but none of them had ever made him want to stay past obligation. Yet, this woman, soaked, trembling, wearing a dress too thin for winter, had made him feel something he couldn't name. He told himself it was responsibility, protection, but deep down, he already knew better. When Emily finally stood, brushing her damp skirt with a nervous hand, she said quietly, I should go home. My father will worry. Liam nodded. I'll have someone drive you. She hesitated, wanting to protest, but the fatigue in her body made the decision for her. Thank you, she whispered. He turned to the security guard stationed nearby and gave a short nod. Take Miss Dawson home. Make sure no one follows. The guard responded with quiet efficiency. Emily looked back at him one last time, her eyes catching his. "Good night, Liam. Good night, Emily." And just like that, she was gone, escorted out through a side exit into the cool Seattle air. Liam stayed behind, his drink untouched, the echoes of the night still circling in his mind. The gala had resumed its rhythm, laughter rising again, chandeliers reflecting perfect artificial joy. But his thoughts weren't there. They were with her. Outside. The rain began again, gentle, rhythmic, as if the city itself was breathing slower now. And for the first time in a long while, Liam Carter, the man who had everything, found himself wondering about the one person who had nothing, yet somehow had managed to stir something alive inside him. He didn't know that by morning her name would be carved into his thoughts, and fate, quiet but relentless, had already begun its work. 3 days passed. The rain didn't visit Seattle that week, but its memory lingered in the air, the gray mist curling around rooftops, the streets slick with yesterday's dreams. Emily Dawson woke before sunrise, as she always did, the soft hum of her alarm blending with the faint rhythm of her father's breathing in the next room. She made coffee, counted the loose bills in her purse, and tried not to think about how close she had come to losing control of her life again. She hadn't heard from Ethan. Not a word. Maybe he was gone. Maybe he wasn't. Either way, she was grateful for the silence. It gave her room to breathe. That morning, as she washed the few dishes in their tiny sink, her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. She almost ignored it. Then something inside her, hope, perhaps, though she hardly recognized it anymore, made her answer. "Miss Dawson?" a woman's voice asked, bright and professional. "I'm calling from Carter Group. Your resume was forwarded to us for the executive assistant position. We'd like to invite you for an interview." Emily blinked. "Carter Group? Yes, ma'am. The headquarters downtown. Are you available tomorrow at 10 a.m.? She stammered out a yes before her mind could catch up. When the call ended, she just stood there, phone in hand, the sound of running water filling the silence. Carter Group. The name felt heavy with significance, familiar, somehow, but she couldn't place why. She'd applied for dozens of positions in recent months: accounting clerks, receptionists, night shift assistants. She didn't remember sending one there, but maybe she had, in some late-night haze between exhaustion and hope. By the time morning came, her nerves had taken over. She borrowed her neighbor's iron, pressed the one blazer she owned, and restitched a loose button on her blouse. The bus ride downtown was long, winding through the misty streets and steel shadows of the financial district. The Carter Group Tower rose high above the city, 40 stories of glass and ambition. She craned her neck, heart fluttering as she stepped through the revolving doors. The lobby was vast, almost cathedral-like, all white marble and silver trim. The air smelled faintly of coffee and new beginnings. At the reception desk, a woman greeted her with a polite smile. "Good morning. You must be Miss Dawson. Mr. Carter will see you shortly." Emily froze. Mr. Carter. The name hit her like a small, delayed tremor. Liam Carter. The man who had held her that night. The man whose quiet voice had felt like safety. It couldn't be. Could it? She followed the receptionist toward the elevator, her palms sweating despite the cool air. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. She stepped inside, watching the numbers climb, 20, 30, 35. Her reflection in the mirrored walls looked pale but determined. When the doors opened on the 40th floor, she stepped out into another world. The hallway was silent, carpeted in deep gray. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, the bay shimmering faintly beyond the rain. She was led to a glass-walled office at the far end, larger than her entire apartment. "Please, wait here," the receptionist said, before disappearing down the corridor. Emily stood still, her fingers tightening around her portfolio. Her eyes wandered over the room, the clean lines of the furniture, the dark oak desk, the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass. And then, a familiar voice behind her. Miss Dawson. She turned, and there he was, Liam Carter, for a heartbeat. Everything inside her went quiet. He looked different now, still calm, still composed, but dressed in a sharp gray suit, confidence built into every line of his posture. Yet his eyes were the same, steady, kind, Liam. She breathed before she could stop herself. He smiled, a flicker of surprise softening his features. Emily, for a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them hummed with something unspoken memory, maybe, or gratitude too deep for words. Finally, she found her voice. I didn't realize you worked here. He tilted his head slightly, amusement touching his lips. Work here. He stepped closer, extending his hand in polite formality. I own the place. Her breath caught. You're Liam Carter, CEO. The words felt too big to fit into the space between them. She stared at him, a dozen thoughts colliding in her mind. The man who had saved her was the man running one of the most powerful companies in the city. He gestured for her to sit, his tone gentle. Please, don't let that intimidate you. She sat slowly, her knees threatening to give way. I didn't know. I know, he said softly. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to see you. Emily blinked, unsure what he meant. You wanted to see me. He nodded, leaning back slightly in his chair. Your resume came through one of our staffing partners. I recognized your name. I thought, maybe we could give this a try. If you're interested, of course. Her fingers tightened around the folder in her lap. You mean, the job, the assistant position, he said. It's demanding, but you're qualified, and the pay might make things a little easier. Emily stared down at the papers she'd brought, though she could no longer read them. Her mind swirled with disbelief, gratitude, and an edge of fear. She didn't want pity, but something in his voice told her this wasn't about charity. Why me? She asked quietly. Liam's gaze held hers. Because I saw how strong you were when everything was falling apart. That's the kind of person I trust beside me. Her throat tightened. She looked away, blinking hard. No one had ever said words like that to her before. For a long moment, the city's hum filled the silence between them. Finally, she nodded. Okay, she said softly. I'll do it. A faint smile touched his lips. Good. He stood, extending his hand again. Welcome to Carter Group, Emily. Her smaller hand slid into his. The contact was brief, formal, but something in her chest stirred, that same strange warmth from the night of the gala. When she left his office, the world outside seemed brighter. She didn't know if it was the sunlight breaking through the clouds or the way her heart felt lighter for the first time in years. As the elevator carried her down, she caught her reflection once more, same face, same clothes, but something in her eyes had changed. Hope, maybe, or the quiet certainty that her life had just shifted again, the way fate likes to do without warning, without apology, and far above her, in his corner office, Liam stood by the window, watching the city stretch out beneath him. He told himself it was a coincidence, that he'd only offered her a chance because she deserved it. But even he didn't fully believe that. Sometimes, destiny doesn't knock, it just opens the door and waits. The first few days at Carter Group felt like stepping into another universe. Everything gleamed: the polished floors, the chrome elevators, even the people. They moved with purpose, their voices steady, their confidence shining like armor. Emily, with her neatly pressed thrift store blouse and borrowed heels, felt like she was walking on glass. Every footstep sounded too loud, every breath too visible. Still, she learned quickly. She always had. By the end of her first week, she'd memorized the floor plan, the names of every department head, and the rhythm of Liam Carter's schedule. She knew how he liked his coffee black, 2 sugars, no cream. She knew when he needed silence and when he needed company, and, without meaning to, she started noticing the small things about him, the quiet way he thought before speaking, the half smile that appeared when something truly amused him, the soft exhaustion behind his eyes that no one else seemed to see. Her desk was just outside his office, facing the wall of windows that looked over the city. From there, she watched the world move below people hurrying through rain, taxis flashing yellow, clouds rolling over the bay. It was a strange comfort, that view, a reminder that life kept going, even when hers had stopped for a while. One morning, Liam stepped out of his office earlier than usual, adjusting his cufflinks as he walked. "Emily," he said, his tone light but focused. "How's the conference schedule for Friday?" "All set," she replied, scanning the tablet in front of her. "You have breakfast with the investors at 8, followed by the charity committee meeting at 10, lunch with Mr. Hayes was moved to 1:30. He smiled faintly. "You're good at this." She shrugged, trying not to blush. "Just paying attention." "That's more than most people do," he said, and for a brief moment, his gaze lingered before he disappeared back into his office. Days turned into weeks. Her confidence grew. She learned to handle calls from impatient clients, smooth out last-minute crises, even navigate the impossible puzzle of corporate egos with quiet grace. People began to notice her not for her clothes or her past, but for her calm precision. "She's the new girl," someone said in the elevator one afternoon. "Carter's assistant. Doesn't talk much, but she gets everything done. Of course she does." Another replied, "He wouldn't keep her otherwise." Emily overheard, but didn't react. She'd learned long ago that whispers were just part of the noise. What mattered were actions, not words. And Liam noticed, more than once, he'd watch her through the glass wall of his office, observing how she managed chaos without raising her voice. The way she spoke to people with empathy, not authority, had a quiet strength that impressed him. He found himself looking forward to her updates, her calm presence. Sometimes, when the weight of endless meetings pressed too heavily, her voice soft but steady was enough to pull him back from the edge of frustration. One evening, long after most of the staff had gone home, Emily was still at her desk, typing up notes from the day. The office was quiet, city lights flickering beyond the windows. Liam stepped out, jacket slung over his shoulder. "You're still here?" he asked. She glanced up, startled. "Just finishing the client summary. I wanted it ready for tomorrow." He smiled. "You know, you don't have to work this late every night." She gave a small laugh. "I don't mind. It keeps my mind busy." He leaned against her desk, watching her for a moment. Busy is one thing, worn out is another. There was something about his voice gentle, careful that made her look up. Their eyes met, and for a second, the office around them faded, just the hum of the city and the faint glow of the lamp between them. "I'll finish this and go home," she said quietly. "Promise?" She nodded. He hesitated, then reached out, adjusting the corner of a file on her desk an excuse, maybe to linger a moment longer. "You've done good work, Emily. Better than most people I've had in this role." "Thank you," she whispered, meaning it more deeply than she expected. When he finally left, the elevator doors closing behind him, Emily sat for a while longer, staring out at the city lights. There was something shifting between them, subtle but unmistakable. It wasn't spoken aloud. It didn't need to be. The next morning, she found a note on her desk, a handwritten one, rare in this office of emails and printed memos. Meeting rescheduled to 11, and don't forget breakfast. L. She smiled despite herself. It was such a small thing, but it carried warmth, the kind that slipped quietly under her skin. Over the following days, the rhythm between them deepened. They shared inside jokes about impossible clients, exchanged glances in crowded meetings that said more than words could. He trusted her with details no one else handled: contracts, private correspondence, the fragile machinery that kept a billion-dollar company turning. One afternoon, during a particularly tense negotiation, Emily noticed the faint tremor in Liam's hand beneath the conference table. Without thinking, she slid him a small note. "Breathe." He read it, then exhaled. a hint of a smile returning to his face. Later, as they walked out of the room, he murmured, "You saved that deal." She shook her head. "You did." "No," he said, looking at her. "We did." It was a small exchange, but in it, something took root. Each day that followed carried a new, quiet tenderness, shared silences in the elevator, coffee cups left beside her computer, small acts of understanding that didn't need to be named. She tried to ignore the warmth she felt when he spoke her name, the way her heartbeat shifted when his sleeve brushed hers. But hearts don't always wait for permission. And Liam, for all his discipline, found himself thinking of her even when he shouldn't, when the meetings dragged on, when the city lights blurred against the night. The thought of her steadied him, made the world feel human again. Neither of them said anything. They both knew the lines that shouldn't be crossed, but in the space between professionalism and something softer, something truer was beginning to grow. By late evening, when the office emptied and the world outside darkened into silver rain, Emily would sometimes glance toward his closed door, half expecting it to open, half hoping it wouldn't. And though she didn't know it yet, he often stood on the other side of that door, staring at her silhouette against the glass, wondering when admiration had turned into longing, and why it suddenly felt so dangerous. Somewhere in the soft hum of the city below, love had already taken its first quiet breath. The days at Carter Group blurred into one another meetings, reports, phone calls, and late nights spent in the soft hum of computer screens. But somewhere in the rhythm of it all, something unspoken had begun to take root between Emily and Liam. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't loud, it was quiet, steady, like the way dawn creeps into a dark room before you realize the night is gone. They worked side by side most evenings, long after the others had left. The office, once full of voices and ringing phones, would grow still. Only the low murmur of their conversation filled the space, the sound of papers shifting, the clink of a coffee mug, the soft sigh of someone trying not to fall too far into their thoughts. Sometimes, Liam would look up from his laptop to find her bent over a stack of documents, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had this habit pressing her lips together when she was thinking hard, unaware that it made him lose track of whatever he was reading. He'd pretend to check an email just to watch her, that calm focus, that quiet determination. Emily, for her part, tried not to notice the way his presence steadied her, how his voice, deep and even, could quiet the chaos in her head. It frightened her, this new comfort. She had built her life around surviving, staying invisible, avoiding anything that could hurt again. And yet, every time he smiled at her, the walls she'd carefully rebuilt seemed to soften. One night, a storm rolled in. The rain tapped against the tall windows, and lightning flashed over the bay. Emily was gathering her things when Liam said, "You should wait until it slows down. Roads will be slick." She glanced toward the window. The city was a blur of silver and shadow. "I don't mind the rain," he smiled faintly. "I remember." She froze at that, just a breath of silence, but enough. He was talking about that night, the gala, the chaos, the kiss that had saved her. Before she could find words, he added quietly, "That night, you looked terrified, but you were brave anyway." Her heart stuttered. She didn't know what to say, so she didn't. The air between them thickened, full of memory neither of them could name. He looked down at the papers in his hand, as if realizing what he'd said, and then set them aside. "Sorry," he murmured, almost to himself. "It's just sometimes I think about how strange fate can be. You walk into a room, meet someone for a few minutes, and everything changes." Emily gave a small, careful smile. "I think about that too." Their eyes met, and for a moment, time slowed. The rain faded to a hush, the lightning distant now, and all that existed was the warmth of his gaze, the same steadiness that had anchored her that night. But she knew better than to linger there. The line between them was clear. She was his assistant. He was her boss. And yet, the heart doesn't follow office rules. At the end of the week, Carter Group hosted its annual charity gala, the same event where fate had once played its cruel trick on her. This time, She came prepared. Her dress was simple, dark blue silk borrowed from a friend. She had promised herself she would blend in quietly, do her work, and stay invisible. But when she entered the ballroom, Liam was already there, greeting guests with practiced ease. Their eyes met across the room, just a glance, but enough to make her pulse stumble. As the night unfolded, she moved between tables, checking lists, coordinating with staff. Yet, every now and then, she felt his gaze subtle, steady, like a thread pulling her closer without a word. Later, when the speeches were done and the music softened, he approached her near the balcony doors. The city spread out below them, lights glittering like 1,000 tiny promises. "You've done well tonight," he said, his voice low enough to blend with the hum of violins. "Thank you," she whispered. "You make it easy." He chuckled softly. "That's the first time anyone said that about me." She smiled, and for a moment, she let herself just be no fear, no past, just two people standing too close under the same sky. Then, in a tone half teasing, half tender, he said, "You know, I never did get to thank you for that night." She blinked. "Thank me. For saving me from the most awkward scene of my life," he said, all smiling. "You have no idea how many people still think I was secretly dating someone mysterious that evening." She laughed, but it came out nervous. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to start rumors. I don't mind the rumors," he said softly, "only that you disappeared right after." Her heart skipped. He was too close now, the faint scent of his cologne threading through the air. The music slowed, a romantic rhythm lingering in the background. "Liam," she began, but her voice caught. "We shouldn't." "I know," he said, cutting her off gently. "But knowing doesn't make it easier." For a moment, neither spoke. The line between them shimmered clear and fragile, but trembling under the weight of everything unsaid. She looked away first. "I should get back to work." He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course." As she turned to leave, his hand brushed hers just a fleeting touch, a spark in the quiet. She didn't pull away, not immediately. Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the scent of rain and memory. She stood alone for a moment on the balcony, her heartbeat unsteady, her thoughts a storm of what-ifs. Inside, Liam watched her from the doorway. There was a calm to his face, but his eyes told another story, one of restraint, of longing carefully hidden behind duty. They both knew it couldn't happen. Not here, not like this. But in the silence that followed, as the city lights shimmered below and the music swelled once more, they both felt it, the quiet, undeniable truth that something had already begun, something that neither of them could stop. And somewhere deep down, both feared and hoped for the same thing, that one day soon, the line between them would blur beyond repair. The night was quiet, too quiet for a city like Seattle. The office lights had gone out hours ago, and Emily sat alone by her apartment window, the glow of her laptop the only light in the room. Rain tapped gently against the glass, soft and rhythmic. For once, it felt peaceful, safe. She was finishing a report Liam had asked for, a small project, but she wanted it perfect. Ever since the gala, since the night on the balcony when his eyes lingered a little too long, everything between them had felt heavier, softer, dangerous, and beautiful. She didn't dare name it, but she felt it in the quiet ways he looked at her, the way his voice changed when he said her name. The clock ticked past midnight. She yawned, reached for her phone, and then a message flashed across the screen. "Unknown number. I know where you work now." Her stomach tightened. Her hand went cold around the phone. Another message came before she could even breathe. "If you don't come meet me, I'll go find your father." Her heart dropped. The words blurred for a moment before she forced herself to read them again. Every letter was a knife, cutting through the fragile calm she'd built. No, no, not again. Her breath came short. Her mind spun through panic, denial, fear. She hadn't seen Ethan in months. She'd blocked every number, moved apartments, changed her route to work. How had he found her again? She stood abruptly, pacing the small living room. Her thoughts darted toward her father, his fragile heart, the quiet neighborhood where he lived. He couldn't handle this. She couldn't let him know. Her fingers shook as she typed back, "What do you want?" The reply came almost instantly. "You know what I want. Meet me at the pier, midnight tomorrow." Emily's hand covered her mouth to muffle the sound that escaped her half gasp, half cry. She stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Her reflection ghosted back at her, pale and terrified. For a moment, she thought about not telling anyone. She always handled things alone. She always had. But the thought of Ethan near her father, near her life again, made her knees weaken. She needed help. Without thinking, she opened her phone's contact list and tapped the one name she trusted, Liam Carter. He answered after the first ring, his voice rough with sleep. "Emily, what's wrong?" Her breath hitched. She hadn't realized she was crying until then. "It's him," she whispered. "Ethan. He found me." There was a pause, brief, controlled, but she could almost hear the tension coil in his silence. "Tell me exactly what he said." She read the messages, her voice trembling. When she finished, he didn't speak for a moment. Then, quietly but firmly, "You're not meeting him." "I don't have a choice," she said, her voice breaking. "He said he'd hurt my father." "You have a choice," he said, sharper now, "and you're not going alone. You're not going at all." "Liam, I mean it." The sound of movement came through the line footsteps, a door opening. "Text me your address. Right now? Liam, it's late. You don't have to." I said, "Send it, Emily." There was no anger in his tone, just command, protection, the kind that left no room for argument. She sent the address, her hands still trembling. 20 minutes later, headlights swept across her window. A knock followed. When she opened the door, Liam stood there still in his suit from earlier, rain clinging to his hair and shoulders. He looked at her for half a second, reading everything on her face, then stepped inside without a word. "Show me the messages." She handed him the phone. He read them once, jaw tightening, then again more slowly. When he finally looked up, his eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them. "He's not just harassing you anymore," he said quietly. "He's threatening you. That changes everything." "What do we do?" she asked. "We don't do anything," he said. "I do." He made a quick call, his voice calm but clipped. "It's Carter. I need a private security detail at this address tonight. 2 men, armed, discreet, and I want surveillance on a man named Ethan Brooks. Find his last known location and send it to me within the hour." When he hung up, Emily just stared at him. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." His gaze softened slightly. "You think I'm going to let him near you again?" Her throat tightened. She didn't know how to respond, so she just shook her head. He sat down beside her on the small couch, his presence filling the tiny room. "Tomorrow, we'll go to the police. I'll handle the paperwork and legal counsel. You won't be alone in this." She nodded, tears spilling over despite herself. "Liam, I don't want you to get dragged into this. It's my mess." "Don't call it that." His voice was quiet but firm. "You didn't choose what he did to you. You survived it. That's not a mess. That's strength." Something in her broke then, not from fear this time, but from the gentleness in his tone. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, pressing her palms to her eyes. He didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he placed a hand on her shoulder. The warmth of his touch was steady, grounding. "You're safe tonight. I promise." She nodded again, breathing in the scent of rain and his cologne. For a moment, the world felt smaller, contained just her, him, and the quiet thrum of safety he carried. The knock at the door startled her, but Liam was already up. 2 men stood outside, broad, silent, professional. He gave them instructions, then closed the door and turned back to her. "They'll stay outside until morning," he said. You'll sleep. Try to rest. She wanted to argue, to say she couldn't possibly sleep, but exhaustion pressed heavy behind her eyes. She just whispered, "Thank you." He looked at her a long time before replying, "Don't thank me yet." When he finally left, the apartment felt both emptier and safer at once. She lay awake for a while, staring at the faint glow of streetlights against the ceiling. The phone sat beside her on the nightstand, silent now, but in her chest, something restless stirred, a mix of fear and gratitude, dread and comfort. Outside, the rain began again, soft and relentless, somewhere out there. Ethan was waiting, but this time, she wasn't alone. And in his downtown office, long after she had drifted into uneasy sleep, Liam sat behind his desk, phone in hand, voice low and lethal as he gave one final instruction to the man on the other end of the line. "Find him, and make sure he understands what happens when you threaten someone under my protection." Then he ended the call, staring out at the city lights. His reflection in the glass looked colder than he remembered. He had promised to protect her, and he intended to keep that promise no matter the cost. The air in the underground parking garage was heavy with silence, the kind that hums right before something breaks. It was late. Most of the lights on the lower level had gone dim, leaving long shadows stretching between the rows of empty cars. Emily's heels clicked softly against the concrete as she walked toward her old sedan, keys clutched tight in her trembling hand. She had stayed late again, finishing reports Liam had asked for, trying to pretend that life had gone back to normal after that night the messages came, the night fear had found her again. But normal was a fragile word. She reached her car, slipped her hand into her bag to find the key fob, and froze. A faint sound echoed behind her. Not the hum of an engine, not the soft drip of rainwater through pipes. Footsteps, slow, heavy, too familiar. Her pulse spiked. She turned and there he was. Ethan. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt untucked, his breath sharp with alcohol. "You thought you could hide from me," he slurred, taking a step forward. "You think that job, that fancy building, that man, any of that changes what you are?" Emily's throat tightened. She stepped back, her hand shaking around the keys. "Ethan, please, just go." "The police." He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "The police. They don't scare me. You don't scare me." He lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. She gasped, the keys clattering to the ground. "You're coming with me," he hissed. "We're going to talk, you and me, like before." "No." She pulled back, panic rising, the scent of whiskey thick in the air. "Let me go." But his grip only tightened. "You owe me, Emily. After everything I gave you, you think you can just walk away." Her heart pounded in her ears. She struggled, but he was stronger, always had been. His fingers dug into her arm, his voice twisting into something darker. "You belong to me." And then, a voice cut through the stillness, calm but cold. "Let her go." Ethan froze. From the shadows near the elevator, Liam stepped forward, flanked by 2 security guards. His suit jacket was off, sleeves rolled up, expression unreadable. "Now," he repeated, his tone sharper, quieter, dangerous. Ethan's eyes flickered between them, confusion giving way to a sneer. "Oh, I see. The rich boss, the savior." He laughed, the sound ugly and unhinged. "Is this what you traded me for?" "Emily, a man in a suit." "Enough," Liam said, his voice low, steady. He took another step closer. "You're drunk. Walk away before this gets worse." Worse. Ethan's laughter cracked. Wild. "You think you can tell me what to do? You think money fixes everything?" He shoved Emily hard, sending her stumbling backward against her car. Pain shot through her shoulder, but before she could fall, Liam was there, crossing the distance faster than she could see. His hand caught Ethan's arm mid-swing, twisting it just enough to make him drop the bottle he'd been hiding in his jacket. It shattered on the floor, the sound sharp as glass rain. "Don't touch her again," Liam said quietly. His calm was gone now, replaced by something colder. "Ever." Ethan spat, face red. "You think you can protect her forever? People like you?" But he didn't finish. One of the guards stepped forward, restraining him as he fought and cursed. "Get off me!" Ethan shouted. "You can't keep me away from her." Liam's jaw tightened. "Actually," he said, "I can..." And then, almost as if on cue, sirens echoed faintly from above. Blue and red light began to flash at the far end of the garage, growing brighter with each passing second. Ethan's shouting turned desperate. "Emily, tell them the truth. Tell them I didn't." But she couldn't. Her voice was gone, her body trembling as officers closed in. One took Ethan by the arm, reading him his rights as he struggled. Another came to her, asking questions she barely heard. Through the haze, she felt a hand steady her warm, grounding. Liam's... "It's over," he said softly, his voice barely audible above the chaos. "You're safe now." She wanted to believe him, but her body was shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline had drained, leaving only exhaustion. The sound of Ethan's voice faded as they led him away, his words dissolving into echoes. Liam turned to her fully then, his hands settling gently on her shoulders. "Emily, look at me." Her eyes met his, wide and dazed. I thought he was gone," she whispered. "I know," he said, his thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. "He is now." The tension in her body broke. She took one shaky step forward, then another, until she was in his arms. He held her without hesitation, without words, just held her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself cry quietly, freely, into his chest. His embrace didn't promise that everything would be easy, or that the past would vanish overnight, but it promised something stronger, that she wasn't alone anymore. He whispered something she barely caught. "You never have to run again." Outside, the sirens faded into the distance. The air in the garage seemed lighter now, though the scent of spilled whiskey lingered faintly in the concrete air. One of the guards picked up her fallen keys, placed them gently on the car hood, and nodded before walking away. Liam stayed with her until the last of the officers left. When the space finally fell silent again, he exhaled deeply, the weight of it all visible in his shoulders. "Let's get you home," he said softly. She looked up at him, eyes swollen but calm. "Liam," she whispered. "How did you know he'd be here?" He hesitated, then admitted, "I didn't, but I had someone watching, just in case." Her lips parted in surprise. You were protecting me." "I told you," he said, his gaze steady on hers. "I meant what I said." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his hand lingering just long enough to say what words couldn't. And in that quiet, something shifted again, deeper this time, beyond fear, beyond gratitude. The storm had passed, but the air still trembled with what came next. As they walked toward the elevator, Emily leaned slightly into him, her body still fragile but her heart a little steadier. Above them, the city lights glowed against the night sky, reflections of a world that had nearly swallowed her whole and the man who had pulled her back from it. Twice now. The doors closed behind them with a soft chime, and in that hush, surrounded by the hum of the city far below, Emily realized something she couldn't quite speak yet. It wasn't just safety he had given her. It was hope. The city was quieter that evening. The storm had passed, but the sky still carried a faint blush of gray, like the world was taking one last deep breath after a long cry. From the windows of Carter Group's top floor, the lights below looked like stars trapped under glass, tiny, trembling, and impossibly far away. Emily stood near that window, her reflection ghosted against the night. It had been 2 days since the police took Ethan away. 2 days since she'd stopped shaking every time her phone buzzed. 2 days since Liam had looked at her with that mix of anger, worry, and something else she didn't dare name. She thought the relief would come quickly, that once it was over, the fear would simply fall away. But peace, she was learning, doesn't come when danger ends. It comes when the heart finally feels safe again. And tonight, her heart wasn't sure if it was ready for that. The office door opened softly behind her. She didn't have to turn to know it was him. She could always feel when Liam was near. The air shifted somehow. Quieter. Steadier. "Hey," he said gently. She turned, managing a faint smile. "Hey." He crossed the room. No suit jacket this time, just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. There were shadows under his eyes. He hadn't been sleeping much either. "How are you holding up?" Emily hesitated, then answered honestly. "Better, I think." He nodded, hands in his pockets. "The restraining order's been filed. The police will handle the rest. You don't have to worry anymore." She nodded, but her gaze drifted back to the city lights. "I'm trying not to." Silence settled between them, comfortable, almost fragile. He stepped closer. "I should have done more sooner," he said quietly, "if I'd known." She shook her head, cutting him off softly. "You did enough. Liam, you saved me. Again." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. All the walls he'd built, the ones made of control, of professionalism, of distance, they cracked just a little. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the city below was the only sound. Then Emily said, almost in a whisper, "There's something I need to tell you." He straightened slightly. "Anything." Her heart hammered in her chest. She could hear her own breath, uneven and soft. That night, at the gala, she began, her voice trembling. "When I kissed you, I wasn't thinking. I was terrified. I just wanted to survive." He nodded slowly, listening, his gaze steady. "But later," she continued, "I kept thinking about it, not because of what happened, but because of how it felt, how you didn't push me away, how you made me feel safe." She paused, her throat tightening. "And I think, somewhere between that night and now, I fell in love with you. I didn't mean to. I just did." The words hung there, delicate and irreversible. Liam didn't move. For a heartbeat. She thought she'd said too much, that she'd ruined everything. But then, he took a slow step toward her. Then another. When he stopped in front of her, his voice was barely a whisper. "Emily," he said, "do you know what I thought the moment you kissed me that night?" She shook her head. "I thought I was dreaming," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Because for the first time in years, someone looked at me like I wasn't just the man in the suit. You didn't know who I was. You just trusted me." Her eyes glistened. "I didn't even know your name." He smiled gently. "And I think that's why it meant so much." He lifted a hand, hesitating for just a moment before brushing a strand of hair from her face. His thumb lingered against her cheek. "I've thought about that kiss too," he said softly. "Every day since." Her breath caught. "And I think," he continued, "I started falling for you from that very moment." The words were simple, but in his voice, they carried weight, a kind of truth that didn't need grand gestures or perfect timing. She closed her eyes for a second, a tear slipping free. "Liam," he smiled faintly, "you've cried enough. Emily, let me be the reason you stop." Something broke open inside her, then not the fragile kind of breaking, but the kind that sets something free. She reached up, her fingers trembling slightly, and touched his hand. Neither of them moved for a moment. The space between them felt electric, sacred. Then he leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met softly at first, then deeper, warmer. It wasn't like the first time. That kiss had been born of fear. This one was born of choice. Time seemed to dissolve around them. The hum of the city faded. The office lights dimmed to a soft gold glow. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, smiling through tears they didn't bother to hide. Liam brushed his thumb across her cheek again, his voice quiet, steady. "That was the first real kiss," he said, no fear, no pretending. She laughed softly, and no audience. He chuckled too, that low, warm sound she loved. Then, more serious, he said, "You know this changes everything, right? I know," she whispered, "but maybe it's time everything changed." He exhaled, relief softening his features. "Then, let's start there." Outside, the clouds finally parted. A thin beam of moonlight spilled across the floor, touching them both. It was gentle, silver, forgiving like the night itself was giving them permission to begin again. Emily rested her head against his chest, listening to the quiet rhythm of his heart. It was steady, sure, grounding her in a way nothing else ever had. He held her close, his chin resting lightly on her hair. "We've both been through enough darkness," he murmured. "Let's not run from the light anymore." She smiled against him. "I'm not running anymore." The office was silent except for their breathing. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass. But for the first time, Emily didn't feel small against it. She felt seen, held. The girl who once hid beneath the rain had found her shelter not in walls or distance, but in someone's arms. And as Liam pulled her closer, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead, Emily thought that maybe, just maybe, every storm she had survived had been leading her here, to this moment, to him. 6 months later, the city felt different. Maybe it was just her lighter somehow, breathing again after years of holding her breath. The rain still fell over Seattle, but Emily no longer flinched at its sound. It was no longer a reminder of the night she ran. It was just rain now, soft, cleansing, alive. Ethan's trial had ended 2 weeks ago. The verdict was clear. He would serve his time, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the shadow of his presence behind her. She didn't celebrate the news. She just exhaled, quietly, peacefully. Some endings didn't need applause. They just needed stillness. Her father's health had improved, too. The doctors said the new treatment plan was working, and the insurance Liam had arranged through Carter Group covered every cost. She visited him every weekend, bringing flowers from the small stand near her office. He always asked about the kind man who helped us. His smile, knowing, patient. She'd blush, promise to bring Liam next time, and he'd chuckle like he already knew she was in love. At work, everything had changed. Emily had been promoted to head of public relations, something she never imagined she'd be capable of. The same woman who once juggled 3 part-time jobs now led a team of her own, her voice steady in meetings, her name respected in rooms she used to clean. And Liam. He had kept every promise. They had built something quiet but sure, away from gossip, away from spectacle. Their relationship wasn't born in fire anymore. It was built in calm mornings, in laughter over coffee, in the way they reached for each other's hands during the simplest moments. Sometimes, in meetings, he'd glance at her across the table just to look. No words, and it would say everything. We made it. That evening, the sun was sinking low behind the sound, painting the water in gold and coral. The windows of their apartment caught the last light, scattering it across the walls. Emily stood barefoot on the balcony, a mug of tea in her hands, the air cool against her skin. Below her, the city moved like a slow heartbeat, steady, familiar. Behind her, she heard the quiet sound of footsteps. She didn't turn. "You're home early," she said softly. Liam's voice was warm. Couldn't wait. He joined her by the railing, the breeze tugging gently at his shirt. They stood like that for a while, watching the sky shift through its colors. There was no rush. They had learned to live without rushing. Finally, he spoke, his tone quieter now. "Do you ever think about that night?" She smiled faintly. "Which one?" He chuckled. The one that started it all. The gala. The kiss. Emily turned toward him, her eyes soft. Sometimes, she admitted, it feels like it happened to someone else. He studied her for a moment. Maybe it did, he said gently. You're not the same woman anymore. No, she said, looking out toward the water again. I'm not, but I think she had to exist so I could become this one. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket, fingers brushing something small. When she turned to ask, he was already kneeling. The world seemed to hold its breath. He didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. He just looked up at her with that same quiet steadiness that had saved her life once, and said softly, Emily Dawson, will you marry me? Her breath caught for a heartbeat. Everything around her blurred the city, the sound of the sea, even the sky itself. All she could see was him, the man who had stood between her and fear, the man who had taught her that love doesn't rescue, it rebuilds. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, yes. Liam smiled, that warm, unguarded smile she loved, and slipped the ring onto her finger. The diamond wasn't large, but it caught the light like a drop of rain, clear, pure, alive. He stood, and she wrapped her arms around him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The hum of the city filled the silence between them, steady and eternal. Later, they sat together on the couch, the lights low, her head resting on his shoulder. She traced small circles on his hand with her thumb. You know, she said quietly, it still amazes me how everything started with a moment I thought would destroy me. Liam looked down at her, his voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes life hides beginnings inside what looks like an ending. She smiled, eyes closing as she let the words settle. Outside, the rain began again, soft this time, gentle against the windows. It no longer sounded like fear. It sounded like home. Emily leaned closer, her voice a breath against his skin. Do you think we'll always remember that night? He smiled, pressing a kiss to her hair. Always, he said, but not for the fear, for the miracle that came after. The room went quiet again, filled only with the sound of the rain and the steady rhythm of two hearts that had finally found peace. And as the night deepened, the city lights flickered softly across the glass, painting the room in silver and gold. Emily looked out at them at the same skyline that once felt too big, too cruel, and smiled. The girl who once hid beneath a storm had found her way through it, not by escaping the rain, but by learning how to stand in it without fear, in that quiet, sacred moment. She took Liam's hand and whispered, We made it. He squeezed her fingers gently. We did, and together. They sat in the warm hush of their home, the sound of the rain carrying their story into the night, a story that began with a desperate kiss and ended with a promise that would last forever. Sometimes life's gentlest lessons are born from its hardest storms. Emily's story reminds us that strength doesn't always roar. It often whispers in the quiet moments when we choose to begin again. We all carry pieces of the past that hurt, people who've broken our trust, or fears that once defined us. But healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from learning to see ourselves not as victims of what happened, but as survivors who grew through it. Love, too, changes its meaning with time. It isn't always about passion or rescue. Sometimes it's about safety, kindness, and being seen for who we truly are. Emily found love not in escape, but in courage in allowing herself to be loved again after pain. For those of us who have weathered loss or disappointment, her story is a quiet reminder. It's never too late to start over, to forgive, to open the door to life once more. Even in the rain, there's beauty because rain, after all, is how the world learns to bloom again. Thank you, dear listeners, for staying with us until the very end of this story. If Emily's journey touched your heart, if it reminded you of courage, kindness, or the power of starting over, please take a moment to support our channel. Like this video to help more people find it. Share it with someone who might need a little hope tonight. And don't forget to subscribe to Shining Stories for more heartfelt tales that warm the soul and celebrate the beauty of being human. Your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you from our hearts to yours.